Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I wanted to have a discussion on a few different things that I think should probably be up next on Bungie's list of things to address. You know, we just got a pretty big patch that updated some things like, we had a nerf to the Thorn and the Peacekeepers. We had a lot of changes to the Checkmate game mode, and I know that they've been busy and hard at work addressing some things and taking in player feedback and making modifications based on all that, but I think there are still a few things that are kind of high ticket items that I think are pretty big pain points right now in PvP. It would be great if those were up next on the docket for Bungie to start addressing. And the first thing that I want to address is class identity. And this is kind of I wanted to talk about Threaded Spectre as well, and I'm going to sort of rope that into this because I think that it is connected to class identity. But one of the biggest issues I have right now is that class identity seems to have really been sacrificed in a lot of the recent seasons as we continue to release things that used to maybe be specific to one class. Now everybody gets to use them, and some classes actually do that thing better than the original class. So Threaded Spectre kind of ties into this because, we got the Broodweaver. The Broodweaver is entirely about the use of threadlings. I mean, it's in the name. It's all about being the brood mother and having all your bug army, right? But now we have hunters have the ability to use and leverage threadlings way more effectively than Broodweavers can. And that sort of shatters the class identity for me, right? I love the initial Strand Hunter kit. I thought was sort of like, it was high skill ceiling kind of stuff. Like you could pull off some really cool technical things as a Strand Hunter, but now it's sort of devolved into just send out bug army, right? We've got the Threaded Spectre, and here's the thing, this just does everything better. You know what I mean? So it's got too many things going for it, and that's why it is so... I mean, I had a lobby yesterday where the enemy team had 4 Strand Hunters on it, all of them running Threaded Spectres. You can use 6 Coyote to get 2 dodges back to back to make 2 decoys. Those decoys aren't just decoys, they are physical cover that they can stand behind or beside and shoot from. They are aim assist black holes, so even though you recognize that as a decoy and you're trying to shoot the actual opponent, if they are anywhere near the line of sight of that Threaded Spectre, the aim assist is so it's got so much gravity to it that it just pulls your reticle away from the thing that you're trying to shoot and into the Threaded Spectre. And so people are starting to use it as sort of a bit of physical cover that they can duel around. So it does a proximity explosion, which does damage. It sends out threadlings. It just has too much going for it. It's got a full list of benefits that you get for just using your class ability. And like I said, you could run 6 Coyote, you could run Aeons and get them back more quickly, more effectively. And then obviously you stack on top of that the fragments that make the threadlings seek more aggressively, last longer, do more damage. And so they're stacking all these things together to basically create a kit that is so much more effective as a Broodweaver than a Broodweaver could ever hope to be. And it is my opinion that threadlings, they could be annoying, but they certainly weren't nearly as egregious and overused as they are in the current sandbox. That's because, quite frankly, a Hunter Dodge just has so much more utility, and so does Threaded Spectre, than any Broodweaver technical skill or ability could possibly hope to have. All these advantages that the Threaded Spectre now has, and that's why it's become such an egregiously overused ability in PvP, and in my opinion, it runs contrary to the goals that Bungie has laid down for PvP, where they want abilities to sort of be there to support your gunplay. They're there to enhance your gunplay, to help supplement your gunplay. They're not there to replace your gunplay. And Threaded Spectre runs in direct contrast to that vision, in my opinion. And I play all subclasses. I'm not just picking on hunters here, but I'm going to be 100% honest. It's just got too much going for it. You can send out the bug army. You can throw down a threadling grenade. You can do a dodge roll, shoot your decoy, make the threadlings, do another dodge roll, shoot the Spectre, make more threadlings. And you've now sent out, 7 bugs. And after a while, those threadlings, if you don't shoot them the second they spawn, they then cease to be vulnerable. They cannot be hit, they cannot be shot, they cannot be destroyed. So if you aren't actively dumping your magazine into those threadlings the second they spawn, then they're going to be in play. They're going to be attacking you aggressively. They can jump, I think it's like, what was it, like 15 feet into the air and damage you. So just jumping over them isn't always a viable option either. And even doing so makes you vulnerable. So I just think they've got too much going for it. And this is a bit of a pain point for me on a bigger picture scale, too, when we talk about class identity now. Because a lot of things that sort of used to be identifying core features of specific subclasses have now been shared for everybody. So, the Sun Warrior buff was, in my opinion, one of the coolest things about the Solar Titan. And Solar Titans have just been nerfed into the ground, unfortunately. I feel like it started with Lorelei Splendor, where even before they shipped the helmet, they stripped some of the identity away from the Sunbreaker kit just to make room for Lorelei to exist, only then to immediately nerf Lorelei, which obviously they should have done. But if it was up to me, I would say please never even make Lorelei a thing and keep the class identity intact for the Solar Titans. It was never about just being a recovery fiend. And along those lines, I think that some things shouldn't be shared. I think of like healing grenades. I think of those. And I think that is a unique thing to the support kit of the Solar Warlock. You know what I mean? That's like a support feature of a support class. And now giving it to everybody means that it can now integrate into builds that are all about just like raw aggression, throw down the healing grenade, get a chunk of health mid-duel. And I think that breaks the original vision for what that ability was designed to do. I think of trip mine grenades. It's just, I still think about that and I'm like, that's just wrong. That is literally a gunslinger thing. The gunslinger kit was all about having these gadgets. You're almost like Batman to a certain degree. You've got all these gadgets at your disposal, and the trip mine, being a trapper, that is so hunter. It's so weird to me that is a shared thing. I use suppressor grenades when I'm playing on my Voidwalker now. I enjoy using them, but I'm going to be honest, I think that should probably just be a Void Titan thing. You know what I mean? That just feels like that is part of the class identity of the Void Titan. It's always been about being the counterplay to aggressive supers and ability usage. That was like the thing that you went to. And now even the Devour ability being available to all the classes is friggin' weird to me, because the Voidwalker is supposed to be a vampiric subclass. That's really the whole class identity. It wrapped into one word would be vampiric. I think back into Destiny 1, I remember an update late in Destiny 1's life cycle where Bungie even recognized and said, hey, the vampiric stuff is the core identity of the Voidwalker, and it's fallen behind as other things have been power crept forward, and we really want that vampiric ability to shine through on the Voidwalker, so they buffed a bunch of abilities for the Voidwalker late in D1's life cycle, so that we can start siphoning power and health from our enemies once again. And now that's available to every Void class, and that to me is just wrong. So for me, class identity is one of those things that has kind of been stripped away to a certain degree from Destiny build crafting. And I know that it opens up more options for build crafting when you have more things on the table for every class, but I'm not entirely sure that I'm down to clown with that vision if it means sacrificing the things that are sort of core identifying features of these subclasses. Moving on to the second thing I think Bungie needs to address, and I think Threat Inspector obviously is the big pain point on that first item, but the class identity as a whole is certainly wrapped up in that. But the second thing I want to address is lobby balancing. So I think that, I don't know, maybe something went wrong or slipped through with the update this week, the patch that went through on reset day, because this is what a lot of lobbies have suddenly started to look like. Sometimes you're on the giving end, sometimes you're on the receiving end, but there are so many matches right now where I go in and I look at player skill in third-party websites and I'm like, how did it ever divvy up the teams like this? This seems strange. And this isn't a problem with player count. I mean, you got 12 players in a lobby. That's not a player count issue at that point. The problem is that it seems to be struggling with deciding how to divvy up the teams in a manner that is most fair, most balanced. And I've noticed this. I've played, dozens of hours already since that patch went live. and it seems to be much more egregious than it was before. I think lobby balancing is always a pain point to a certain degree, but I thought that things were getting better up until this current reset, and now suddenly I'm getting a lot of lobbies like this. So maybe it's happenstance, maybe it's just being unlucky, but it has happened enough times, even live on stream for everyone to see. It's happened enough times that I'm starting to raise an eyebrow and say, something might be off here. It might be worth at least popping the hood and just seeing if that thing that's making a noise under the hood is actually something we need to be concerned about, or if it's just a noise. The third thing I think needs to be addressed sooner than later is the Wish Ender bug. So right now, for some reason, Wish Ender is bugged. Sometimes the enemy, you'll stand toe-to-toe with an enemy, and you'll see they've got a Wish Ender out. You'll hear the Wish Ender sound. It's got a very distinct audio cue for when a Wish Ender is fired at you. They release the arrow. Nothing happens. And you're like, hey, cool. He missed his shot. I'm still in this duel. I don't need to immediately disengage like you normally do when you get hit by a bow. So you stay in the fight. But then about a full second later, after you've already decided to not disengage, suddenly your health, without anything else happening, just gets chunked all the way down to almost zero. And that's because the damage on Wish Ender right now is bugged and is oftentimes severely delayed. So it actually works in favor of the bow user because it causes people to stay in the open longer because they think you missed the shot when you in fact hit the shot, but the damage has not registered just yet. So they stay engaged, and now they're an easy cleanup for the bow user. And this happens a lot. It's especially egregious in Trials of Osiris. And for the past couple of trials that we've had, this has been a noticeable issue in the lobbies that I've played in. It's happened to me several times, and it's definitely a pain point. Bows are already difficult to play around, especially in high-stakes environments. They can be really frustrating because their whole thing is basically taking you out of the fight while your recovery waits to kick in. It gives the other team an advantage, the opportunity to push forward, to get map control, while you have to go to ground to get your health back. And there's certainly ways to play around that. It's not that I think that they're super OP and need to be nerfed, but they need to register damage on time because it's not relaying the information for the other combatant, for the person on the receiving end, and they are not given the opportunity to make the correct call. So this Wish Ender bug definitely needs to be addressed ASAP. Now, the last thing I will say that I really hope Bungie gets around to fixing sooner than later is I really hope that they unnerf some of these exotic armor pieces that they nerfed into the ground. Some of them inexplicably. Now, if you are a Hunter main, you are a Titan main, and you feel like there's an exotic that got nerfed into the ground that did not deserve it, I would love for you to add it to the list. So for me, I'm a Warlock main. I play all classes, but I spend most of my time on my Warlock, so I'm more in tune with those nerfs. And I don't want to be blind to any other nerfs that may have happened for you other subclass mains out there. Feel free to add them to the list and speak up in the comments section because I definitely want to know. But on the Warlock side of things, we had some serious nerfs, and Bungie was not, in my opinion, honest about what they were doing to these exotics when they announced these nerfs. They said they were making some technical changes. They used the word, we're making some changes to these exotics. But there's no way that you can look at these changes and say that it was just a rework. They're absolutely nerfs that, in my opinion, were completely undeserved. I think, for example, of Chromatic Fire. And they said the Chromatic Fire wasn't getting used, so they wanted to retune the way that it works so that it would get more uptime in PvP. But what they actually did is they nerfed it and made it so it has even less usage in PvP because now it has less utility. So before the nerf, before the change, Chromatic Fire did enough explosive damage to one-shot kill an enemy that was directly next to the person that you headshot. Now, the radius was not as big as Cloud Strike's radius. It was not Cloud Strike worthy where it could get a full team wipe with one headshot. That would never happen. If an opponent was standing shoulder to shoulder, though, with the guy that you headshot killed with a kinetic weapon, had to be a kinetic, couldn't be stasis, couldn't be strand. But if you were to do that with a kinetic weapon, then there would be an explosion that was large enough to one bang whoever was standing directly next to them. And that was the utility of Chromatic Fire. It was a crowd control thing. So what Bungie ended up doing was they said, hey, we're going to buff it. We are actually going to make it so that that explosion now takes on the effect of your subclass. So if you are a Void subclass, it's going to do a weakening debuff to the person next to them. If you're Solar, then it's going to put Scorch stacks. You know what I mean? So That's the direction they went. They wanted to do these debuffs that are keywords for these other subclasses, like Jolt for Arc, and apply that to the explosion. I thought on paper, hey, that sounds cool. What they failed to mention, though, was they were going to nerf the damage output of Chromatic Fire. So now it cannot one bang anybody standing directly next to the guy that you shoot. It's just going to debuff him. So let me just ask you, what would you prefer? Would you prefer that when you get an ability to activate, it immediately kills somebody? Or would you prefer that it applies a debuff on them? I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer, right? It's a stupid question to ask. Hey, would you rather weaken that guy or kill that guy? Everyone's going to say, I would prefer that he just dies. I don't need a debuff. I just want him to die. And that's what Chromatic Fire used to do. Now it can no longer do that. So the only utility that it did have got stripped away from it. And now it just applies debuffs to people that are nearby instead of actually helping you get multi-kills. Similarly, I think of the Mantle of Battle Harmony. And Bungie, again, I think that this is a real head-scratcher for me. I've got a lot of faith in their ability to tune things based on previous changes. But this was one that I scratched my head and I just said, make it make sense. This literally makes zero sense to me. But what they said was, with the Mantle of Battle Harmony, which is an exotic chess piece for the Warlock, they said what we want to do is we want to normalize these damage buffs that these various exotics give. So there's a lot of exotics in the game that will basically make it so that when you get a kill with an elemental weapon type that matches your subclass type, so for example, if I'm on a Void Walker and I get a Void Pulse Rifle kill or a Gnawing Hunger kill with a Void Auto Rifle, now I get a buff called Absorption Cells. And so now for 3 seconds, I can do just a little bit more damage, right? It was basically kind of like getting a stack of Rampage, right? For just 3 seconds. Now, what Bungie decided to do was instead they were going to nerf that damage buff so that it was smaller, and now it cannot stack with other buffs. So the build utility here with Mantle of Battle Harmony is that previously you could stack like a Rampage Void Weapon with the Absorption Cells buffs, so you'd basically get like 2 stacks of Rampage out of the gate. And you had to sacrifice your whole super to do it. So now they say, no, we're going to bring those buffs down. You cannot stack them anymore. So it's a smaller damage output. It still only lasts for 3 seconds. And it's the same buff that you would get from, say, the Mask of Bacchus, right? And so they're basically saying to activate that ability, it's now the exact same buff you'd get from Bacchus. I love using Bacchus, so I know that this is not a fair trade-off at all. Because in order to get that damage buff for the Warlock, you have to sacrifice your whole super to do it, right? You cannot use your super. It has to be fully cooled down, and you cannot use it, or else you will not be getting that buff. So you don't have that buff out of the gate in a match. That buff is only available to you once you get your super, and it will only remain available to you if you choose not to use your super. So that is a huge investment cost to now get an even worse damage buff that cannot stack. And it's the same buff that you would get from Mask of Bacchus, and the cost is much less on Bacchus. With Bacchus, you can use it in your very first engagement in a match, and you don't have to get a kill either. All you have to do is dodge, which has a relatively short cooldown. You can use that many times in a match. Trust me, I main Bacchus on my Hunter now. So if I do a dodge roll, now I can get any stasis or arc weapon is going to get the same damage buff that the Mantle of Battle Harmony does. But I don't have to sacrifice my super for it. I don't have to have it fully charged, and I don't have to hold on to it. So the cost investment there does not make sense. Bungie said they wanted to normalize it to make it fair. That is the opposite of fair. Outside of the Warlock, there's definitely some nerfs to some exotics like the ones I just listed that make no sense. Outside of the Warlock, please give me some input on stuff that you think needs to be reverted or at least dialed back, some nerfs that happen to some other subclass exotics. I think, for example, one of the things that I kind of liked was the renewal grasps on the Hunter. Okay, so renewal grasps were a little broken, right? There's no doubt about it. When they first shipped, they were kind of busted. But I'm going to be honest. I think they over-nerfed it, and now it has very little utility. So one of the things I liked about the renewal grasp was it wasn't just like a cheap, easy profit. It was an actually at least interesting gameplay loop of throwing down your dusk fields and leveraging them properly, going into them and using that cover. You could create the ice crystal in the middle and use it for physical cover too. It was a great way to give people in things like Trials of Osiris is hunters specifically a better option, because in Trials of Osiris, Warlocks and Titans have the edge with Bungie's insistence of having a cap point. So immediately people choose Wells and Bubbles because of their utility at capturing points. They can basically make an impenetrable fortress. So Hunters didn't really have that option. No. So the Renewal Grasp at least gave them, it wasn't physical cover, it wasn't a Well of Radiance, it wasn't a bubble, but it was at least something that if they had that ability cooled down, they could throw a Dusk Field onto the zone and get in there and have a little bit of damage resistance while they were inside their own Dusk Field, which I think is fair to a certain degree, as long as it's not egregious. I think that's fair to a certain degree, and I'm not even a Hunter main. But to give Hunters the option to be able to compete on a cap point, I think that was at least pretty cool. So that is my list of things I think should be high on Bungie's priority list. I think class identity, Threaded Spectres specifically needs to be, I think they need to have another look at that. I think the lobby balancing right now is suspicious enough that maybe they ought to look under the hood and see if something's up. I think the Wish Ender bug is especially egregious and needs to be fixed ASAP. And finally, I think that our variety, our choices in variety in terms of what subclasses we can run and what exotics we can run has really taken a solid hit with some of the recent patches in recent seasons that have dialed down these exotics that once had a seat at the table. I feel like we keep removing seats from the table. We keep removing them. And now the table just has a few options at it. So a lot of the higher end lobbies tend to have just the same few builds being used. And variety is the spice of life. Variety is the spice of destiny for me. And when we keep removing variety from the table, it gets a lot less interesting, a lot more boring, a lot more repetitive. So there you have it. That's my list of things I think Bungie should address sooner than later. Feel free to add anything to my list or contest any of the things that I brought up. You want to say, hey, your bias is showing. This is stupid. This thing you said, that's fine. Just leave a comment. Let me know. My wife reminds me every now and then, too, that sometimes I say dumb stuff. So why shouldn't you be allowed to? Thanks so much for watching the video. I appreciate y'all. Feel free to leave a like on the video, only if you enjoyed it. Be warm and well fed, my friends, and I hope to catch you in the Crucible. Bye-bye.